The road to Shikari Hill was never meant to be traveled after dark. But Zion and Myra had no choice. Their old white car crawled through the winding mountain path as the last orange light of sunset melted behind the peaks. The trees on either side stood tall and still, too still, like silent witnesses who had seen terrible things and had long since stopped caring. Myra pressed closer to Zion, her fingers laced through his. They had been married only 3 weeks ago. The henna on her hands was still fading. She had laughed when her older cousin warned her about these hills. Jinns live there, the old woman had whispered, gripping Myra's wrist. Do not go near the old bungalow. Myra had laughed. She was not laughing now. The car sputtered, then died. Zion turned the key 3 times. Nothing. He stepped out to check the engine, and that was when he saw it, looming at the top of the hill, half hidden behind a curtain of dead trees. The old British-era bungalow. It had been abandoned for decades. Its tall arched windows were dark, except, no. One window on the upper floor glowed faintly, a dim, amber light that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Zion. Myra's voice was barely a whisper. She was standing beside him now, staring at the same window. Someone is up there. It could just be reflection, he said. But his voice had lost its confidence. The wind picked up, a cold, sudden gust that carried something strange. A smell. Old roses. Sweet and heavy and deeply wrong for a dead forest at night. There was no shelter anywhere else. The nearest village was 6 kilometers back. Their phones showed no signal. They had no option. They walked up to the bungalow. The iron gate groaned as Zion pushed it open. The garden, if you could call it that, was a tangle of wild thorns and broken stone. A stone fountain stood in the center, dry and cracked, its carved figures worn smooth by years of rain, but Myra thought, as she passed it, that the figures looked like they were screaming. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the bungalow was enormous. High ceilings lost themselves in shadow. Dusty chandeliers hung like frozen spiders. The floor was old mosaic tile, and their footsteps echoed with every step as if the house itself were listening. Zion found candles in a drawer of the entrance hall, tall red candles, almost as if left there for visitors, and lit them with the lighter from his pocket. The candlelight threw long, dancing shadows across the walls, and Myra noticed the walls were covered in old paintings. Portraits of people she didn't recognize. Men and women in formal dress, staring out from their frames with expressions of deep sorrow. And then she saw one portrait that made her stop breathing. It was a painting of a woman. Young. Dark-eyed. And she looked exactly like Myra. Zion, she said carefully. Come look at this. He looked. His candle flickered even though there was no breeze. It's just a coincidence, he said. But he said it too quickly. They found a room on the ground floor, a sitting room with an old covered sofa and a thick Persian rug. Zion barricaded the door with a heavy wooden chair. They sat together and tried to sleep, taking turns to keep watch. It was past midnight when Myra heard it. Music. Faint. Distant. Coming from somewhere above them. It was unlike anything she had heard before. Not a song exactly, more like a slow, deep humming that seemed to vibrate not just in the air but inside the walls themselves. Inside her chest. She placed her hand over her heart. It was beating in time with the sound. Zion was asleep. She shook him awake. Do you hear that? He listened. I don't hear anything. It's music. From upstairs. He frowned. Myra, there's no one here. You're tired. Try to sleep. But she could still hear it. And it was getting closer. The candle went out by itself. In the dark, Myra felt the temperature in the room drop so sharply she could see her own breath. The air smelled of roses again, stronger now, overwhelming. She pulled her shawl tight and pressed against Zion's shoulder. And then she felt it. Eyes. On her. She could feel them the way you feel sunlight on skin, a warmth, a pressure, a certainty. Something was in the room with them. Something that was not looking at Zion. Something that was looking only at her. She did not dare move. She did not dare breathe. She kept her eyes straight ahead and she prayed, silently, urgently, the way her mother had taught her. Her lips moved without sound, reciting words of protection. The temperature dropped further. And then, a voice. So close it could have been in her ear. Not a whisper. A voice. Low, clear, and ancient, as if it had been waiting to speak for a very long time. You have come back. Zion woke to the sound of his wife screaming. He grabbed her and held her, and she was trembling violently, her eyes wide, staring at a corner of the room. He looked. There was nothing there. But the air was freezing, and the hair on the back of his neck stood straight, and somewhere deep in his mind a primitive alarm was ringing. Leave, leave, leave. We need to go, Myra said. Her voice had gone very flat and calm, which was somehow more frightening than screaming. Now. We need to go right now. Zion did not argue. He grabbed her hand and they moved to the door, and he pulled away the chair and yanked it open, and found themselves looking not at the hallway, but at a garden. Moonlit. Full of roses. A garden that had not been there before. He slammed the door shut. He tried the window. It wouldn't open. He tried the door again. This time it opened to the hallway. He grabbed Myra and they ran. The hallway was different now. The portraits were all turned to face them as they ran. Every painted eye in every frame followed them down the corridor. The candles in the wall sconces lit themselves one by one as they passed, and the light was not warm, it was blue, cold, and it made everything look like the inside of a tomb. Myra was faster than Zion. She reached the front door first and grabbed the handle. It was warm. Not from the metal. From something on the other side. She let go. Stepped back. Zion caught her. They stood together, breathing hard, and stared at the door. It opened. On its own. Slowly. The figure that stepped through was tall. Impossibly tall. It had to bend at the threshold to enter. It wore the clothing of another century, a dark sherwani, embroidered in silver, and its face was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Sharp-boned. Ancient-eyed. It looked at Zion as if he were a minor inconvenience, and then it looked at Myra, and its expression changed entirely. Something like recognition crossed its face. Something like longing. Leave, it said to Zion. Its voice filled the room like water fills a glass. She is not meant for you. Zion did not move. He was terrified. Every nerve in his body was screaming. His legs wanted to run. But he stepped forward instead, placing himself between the creature and his wife, and he raised his right hand, palm outward, and he began to recite. Loudly. Clearly. The verses his grandfather had taught him, the ones meant to protect against what could not be seen, against what had no business walking in the world of men. The creature flinched. It was a small movement, barely anything, but it was there. The ancient eyes narrowed. The air in the room began to vibrate. Myra joined her voice to his. She had been raised with the same prayers. They stood shoulder to shoulder now, voices steady, growing stronger, filling the hallway with sound that seemed to push against the cold, against the blue candlelight, against the overwhelming smell of roses. The creature raised one long hand as if to silence them. Their voices grew louder. The house shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. The portraits on the walls cracked. The chandelier above them swayed violently. A sound like distant thunder rolled through the building, growing, and Myra caught a glimpse of something in the tall mirror at the end of the hallway. Not the creature as it stood before them, but as it truly was, an enormous shape, half seen, made of shadow and ancient fire, surrounded by the faces of others who had been trapped here, trapped for years, kept in a house that refused to let go. You do not understand, the creature said. And for the first time, there was something in its voice that was not power. Something smaller. Something almost wounded. She has been mine since before your world began. I have been waiting. I have always been waiting. She is my wife, Zion said. And she belongs to no one but herself. Myra reached into her bag with a shaking hand. She pulled out the small, worn copy of the Quran she carried everywhere, a gift from her mother on her wedding day. She held it out before her. The creature went still. What happened next was not dramatic. There was no explosion, no burst of light. The creature simply retreated. Slowly, step by step, backward through the door it had entered, as if pulled by invisible hands. Its eyes never left Myra's face, and in those ancient eyes, she saw something she had not expected. Grief. A grief so old it had become something else entirely. A grief that had curdled, over centuries, into obsession. I only wanted, it began. I know, Myra said softly. But this is not the way. The door closed. The temperature in the house rose instantly. The blue light in the candles turned warm yellow. The roses' smell faded. And outside, through the tall arched windows, the first pale light of dawn was beginning to paint the sky. They walked out through the front door as the sun rose. The garden looked ordinary in daylight, overgrown and abandoned, nothing more. The fountain in the center was just a dry stone fountain. The figures carved into its sides were just figures. The car started on the first try. They drove down the hill in silence. Myra held Zion's hand the entire way. When they reached the main road, she finally spoke. It knew my face. I know. That portrait upstairs. The woman who looked like me. She must have been. Don't, Zion said gently. Some things are better left in the house. She was quiet for a moment. Then, do you think it will wait? For the next person who looks like her? Zion didn't answer, because they both already knew. The light in the upper window of the bungalow was still on as they drove away. Amber and pulsing. Patient. As it had been for 100 years. As it would be for 100 more. Some loves are so old they have forgotten what love means. Some houses remember everything. And some hills, you should never visit after dark.